Motocross has always had a complicated relationship with fame. The sport rewards toughness, consistency, and the kind of grinding obscurity that most athletes in mainstream sports never have to endure. The sport doesn't owe you a personality. It doesn't care if the cameras love you. Then Brian Deegan's kid shows up. Haiden Deegan is not just a fast kid on a dirt bike. He's something the sport hasn't fully encountered before. A rider who arrived at the professional level already famous, already polarizing, already carrying a brand identity bigger than most veterans develop in a decade. He didn't build his following after he went pro. He brought it with him. And that changes everything about how you have to understand what he is and what he could become. To understand Haiden, you have to understand where he came from. And not just in a bloodline sense. Brian Deegan is one of the most important figures in the broader dirt bike world, though the supercross purists sometimes forget to give him that credit. He didn't win an AMA Supercross championship. He didn't get inducted as a 450 class legend. What Brian Deegan did was reshape the cultural identity of freestyle motocross, co-founding the metal militia, becoming the backbone of a movement that brought dirt bikes to an audience that had no idea what a whole shot was, and doing it all with a confrontational counterculture attitude that fit the late 90s and 2000s action sports explosion perfectly. Brian was the first rider to land a 360 in FMX competition. He collected X Games medals across two disciplines, Moto X and Rally Cross, becoming one of the most decorated athletes in X Games history. He did this while building a brand, a clothing line, and a lifestyle identity that went far beyond competitive results. He understood early and instinctively that in action sports, who you are can matter as much as what you do on the bike. That lesson didn't get lost in the household. Haiden Deegan grew up in a family where riding and content creation were both just things you did. He started racing young, progressed through the amateur ranks with serious speed, winning 7 titles at the AMA Amateur National Motocross Championship at Loretta Lynn's ranch across various youth classes. And by the time he hit the professional circuit, he already had a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, a social media presence most professional athletes in mainstream sports would envy, and a last name that carried instant recognition in every corner of the moto world. He turned pro as a teenager. He signed with Monster Energy Yamaha Star Racing. His stats are quite unreal. Rookie of the Year and an SMX title in year 1, 2 more championships in year 2, 3 in year 3. That is not a trajectory. That is an accelerating pattern, and it's one the 250 class hasn't seen compressed into this short a time frame in recent memory. But now we get where the Deegan story gets complicated and more interesting. He's not universally beloved, far from it, and the reasons why tell you something important about the tension that exists between old-school moto culture and the direction the sport is heading. Part of the criticism is competitive. In any sport, aggressive riders draw aggressive reactions. Deegan has been involved in on-track incidents, the kind of racing contact and aggressive line choices that, depending on which side of the fence you're on, read as either hard racing or dirty riding. The moto community has never had a consensus on where that line sits, and it's shifted over the generations. What Ricky Carmichael did in his era, what James Stewart was capable of, what Reed and Stewart inflicted on each other at the height of their rivalry, none of it was soft. But the community forgave a lot of it because the speed was undeniable, and the wins piled up. With Deegan, some of that same aggression reads differently to a portion of the audience, partly because he's young, partly because of the platform he carries, and partly because the criticism is amplified instantly on social media in a way it simply wasn't during the Carmichael Stewart era. A questionable pass in 2005 got discussed at the track and in the forums. A questionable pass today gets a 60-second clip, 300,000 views, and a comment section that turns into a verdict before the post-race press conference even finishes. That's the new reality, and Deegan lives in it more intensely than any other current motocross athlete because his audience is enormous and his critics are loud, and the line between fan base and hype machine gets blurry fast when the numbers are that big. The other part of the friction is cultural, and this is worth sitting with. There's a legitimate question that older moto fans and some within the paddock quietly ask, which is, does the off-track persona, the content machine, the Deegan brand ecosystem, does all of that change the nature of what motocross racing is supposed to be? Motocross has historically been a sport that resisted celebrity for its own sake. You earned your reputation on the track. You didn't curate it online. Riders like Carmichael were famously private, almost monastic in their focus. Kevin Windham was beloved for his riding and his character, not for building a content empire. Reed was confrontational and complex, but his identity was always tethered to the race results first. Deegan operates by a different logic, one that is completely native to the generation he came from. Content isn't a distraction from his racing career, it's parallel to it. The two things coexist and reinforce each other. And for his demographic, that's not strange or inauthentic. That's just what an athlete looks like in 2025. What makes the Deegan question genuinely interesting, beyond the debate about his riding and his brand, is what his success could mean for the sport structurally. Motocross has always had a visibility problem relative to its actual depth as a sport. The racing is extraordinary. The athletic demands are among the highest of any motorsport. The technical complexity of setup, conditioning, and technique rivals anything in professional cycling or road racing. But the sport has never broken through to a mass mainstream audience the way NASCAR, F1, or even MMA has. Part of that is media access. Part of it is geography and infrastructure. Part of it is that the sport has never fully cracked the code on producing stars that transcend the core audience. James Stewart was the closest thing to a crossover star the sport produced in its modern era. The raw talent and the backstory were both compelling enough that mainstream outlets occasionally paid attention. Ricky Carmichael was dominant in a way that commanded respect, even from people who didn't follow the sport closely. But neither of them ever truly converted casual observers into long-term fans at scale. Deegan has something different at his disposal, an existing audience that doesn't come exclusively from the moto world. His content reaches people who may have discovered the Deegan family through lifestyle content, through action sports adjacent culture, through social algorithms that served them something they hadn't searched for. Some percentage of those people get curious about the racing. Some of those people watch a supercross broadcast. Some of those people stay. That pathway, content to curiosity to fandom, is a legitimate audience-building mechanism that the sport has never had accessed through one of its own competitive riders before. Not at this scale, not this early in a career. The question now shifts to the 450 class. Not whether Deegan is fast. 5 250 class titles in 3 years answers that. The question is whether he can sustain performance and development through the inevitable hard moments of the premier class. Mechanical failures, injuries, slumps, the psychological grind of a long season against riders at the absolute peak of their careers with years of 450 specific experience. Young riders who dominated the 250 class have arrived in the 450 and struggled to replicate that success immediately. That's not a knock, it's just the nature of the step up. The bikes are more powerful, harder to manage, more unforgiving of technique errors. The competition pool is deeper and more ruthless. Per his contract extension with Yamaha, the plan for 2026 has Deegan running one final 250SX title campaign in Supercross before making the full-time move to the 450 for Pro Motocross and the SMX playoffs. When that transition comes, the sport will be watching with different eyes than it watches any other young rider. The platform means the scrutiny will be intense. Every result, good or bad, will be processed through the prism of the Deegan narrative, either confirmation that the trajectory holds, or ammunition for the critics who have been waiting. There's a parallel worth drawing here, even if it's imperfect. When James Stewart arrived in professional supercross, the sport hadn't seen anything quite like him either. The talent was generational. That was obvious from his amateur career. But Stewart also carried a weight of expectation and a cultural significance that went beyond results. He was being asked to carry a narrative that was bigger than one rider could reasonably bear. And over the course of his career, the sport sometimes struggled to just evaluate him as a racer, rather than a symbol. Deegan isn't navigating the same kind of cultural weight that Stewart carried. That's a completely different conversation. But the structural dynamic, where a rider becomes a symbol of something before the career has fully played out, creates pressure that's worth acknowledging. The people who want Deegan to reshape the sport's image need him to also go win championships in the 450 class. The people who are skeptical of the brand machine are waiting for results to overtake the noise. Both groups are projecting onto a career that, for all its early success, is still in its opening chapters. What the sport should probably do, and largely doesn't do well, is let the career breathe. Deegan at his current stage of development is a 5-time 250 class champion with elite-level raw speed, unusual maturity in certain technical areas of riding, and a platform that gives motocross access to audiences it has never consistently reached. That's real. That's meaningful. It doesn't require inflation to be impressive, but it also doesn't require the 450 championship to be inevitable. He's a young rider in a sport that punishes overconfidence and rewards the long game. The arc isn't written yet. What is clear is that the sport is in a different place because of his existence in it. Supercross broadcast numbers, social engagement metrics, brand partnerships, and the conversations happening inside team management offices about how to build rider identities, all of it is being influenced by the Deegan model, whether the traditional side of the paddock acknowledges it or not. Other riders are paying attention. Other teams are watching. The machinery of motocross, sponsors, promoters, media, is beginning to understand that a rider who brings their own audience is a different kind of asset than a rider who simply wins races. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Winning remains the foundation. Nothing in the content world replaces a championship, but the ceiling of what's possible. For a rider, for a sponsor, for the sport's reach, expands when a competitor can convert track performance into a storytelling engine that runs 52 weeks a year. That's the Deegan proposition, not just, is he fast enough, but what does the sport look like if fast enough and famous enough happen at the same time, in the same rider, at the exact moment the sport is trying to figure out how to grow. Motocross has seen dominant riders. It has seen beloved riders. It has seen controversial riders. It has seen riders who were technically brilliant and personally invisible, and riders who had charisma to spare but never quite put the championship together. A rider who is all of those things simultaneously, dominant, controversial, magnetic, and commercially significant, and who arrives at the 450 class with 5 titles already banked and a generational audience already assembled. The sport hasn't seen that version. Not yet. Haiden Deegan might be it, or he might be the preview for whoever comes next. Either way, motocross is paying attention, and so is everyone else. If Deegan represents where motocross culture is going, then No Fear is the story of where it came from, and exactly how a $200 million brand that defined an entire generation of riders just disappeared. That video is up next. Watch it.